Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Chris Paterna, partner and CRO at Compass, and this is Need to Know, our Webisode series where we cut through the latest industry news and get to the good stuff. I'm joined again today by Seth Larner, partner and CEO at Compass. Welcome. Seth, this is kind of a big deal for us today. This is our 10th Webisode. Can you believe it?
I can't.
Well, I will say that we've had a lot of good times on these webinars, a lot of interesting conversations. Some of our most popular webisodes have been about our Secure Act 2.0 legislation that came on a few years ago. We've had Allison Cohen, our risk attorney and nationally renowned speaker, on one of our webisodes. So we're off to the races here, and hope to continue doing more of these and bringing you guys more excellent content. But not only is this our 10th webisode, this is also the 10th year that Seth and I have been working together. So congratulations. I'm glad that you know me. So
it feels like just yesterday.
Excellent. But today's going to be a good one. Today we're going to get into mergers and acquisitions. We've had a lot of questions on these types of things. With the recent economy, there's been more and more mergers and acquisitions over the years. So we've definitely learned a lot, improved our processes. So we're going to bring some of that to all of you today. So we're going to talk about the 5 W's of M&A. We're going to talk about the workflow and some of the detailed descriptions of each method. Should you combine plans or not? And we'll talk about our approach and some best practices. And of course, as always, we're going to wrap up the webisode with a Q&A section. So some housekeeping items. There's a chat box. You can type in your questions into the chat box. We'll try to address as many as we can at the end of the webisode. If you have any very personal or specific situations that you'd like to address, please reach out to us after the webisode. Don't put that in the chat box, of course. All right, so let's get to it. So we're going to start at the top here and kind of turn it over to Seth. If you can kind of give us some of the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why, and how of mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, what I'm going to do too is I want to talk about the different types of merger acquisitions. And we're going to talk about the 5 W's and our process as we go through each of the different processes. Because there's really, when you look at merger acquisitions, there's really 2 streams. There's asset sales and stock sales. And depending on how someone buys a company, depends on if they do stock or asset, depends on the workflow we have to go down. So first we have to figure out, so number one we have to figure out, is it an asset deal or stock deal? And what I first want to talk about is asset deals, because asset deals are the easiest, they're a little simpler, and that's what most transactions happen as. And in general, an asset deal is you're just buying the assets of the company, you're not buying any liabilities. And unfortunately, attorneys think 401k plans are liabilities. I disagree with them, but that's what they think. So so that is one thing to be aware of, is that asset deals are the more standard purchasing you see. With that, since they don't get the 401k plan, so if you purchase a company, so Chris, let's say you own company Y and I purchase company Y as an asset deal, you're going to be in charge of having to close down your 401k plan. Okay, so that's going to be written in the documents and all that. And you can close it down at your leisure. One thing to be aware of is usually when another company, let's say I purchased your company, I'm going to say, hey, Chris, I want you to close that down right away because we want those rollovers to come into the 401k plan. We want to make those people be part of our plan and be available. Closing down of a 401k plan usually takes 3 to 6 months to do. So I always let clients know that, hey, the other company is going to take them 3 to 6 months depending on the time of the year, because the other TPA is going to have to run all the compliance testing, file the final 5500, and process all distribution. It takes some time, okay? So that's one thing to be aware of.
So just to jump in there too, you made a really interesting point. As you're working with this, if you're acquiring that other company, acquiring company Y, it's a lot of communication to the employees. So we are going to get into some more technical things here, but we don't want to forget about the communication to your employees or your new employees and how that's handled. So
yeah. And I always tell people too, when I get around the merger acquisition side, it's all about employee relations. That's the biggest thing. So with an asset deal, we're not taking on that plan, okay? They can roll money over, let's say in 6 months. The big issue you have to worry about with an asset deal is loans, employee loans. Because those loans, unless they roll them into this plan, and when they roll that loan into this plan, what they're gonna have to do is roll their whole account balance. They just can't roll the loan over, they have to roll their account balance over. Then we can start repayment, their loan payments back up again.
What happens if we don't do a loan rollover? What happens to that loan?
Yeah, so if that happens, then those people get defaulted on their loan. It'll probably be 90 days in the quarter following that they'll get defaulted. Now, one thing to be aware of is that not all vendors will allow loans to be rolled over. So if it's a plan at ADP or Paychex, those two are very firm, no loan rollovers. It's up to the plan administrator to allow it or not. Some firms do have, like I said, ADP and Paychex have a firm no. So we want to know that stuff ahead of time. The other thing to be aware of too is when that transaction happens, we can't loan that rollover the next day. It usually takes 30 to 60 days, and once we get that loan over, then we'll re-amortize that loan. So, to your point, Chris, it's all about employee relations, communicating to the employees, hey, this is going to take some time. Don't think this is going to happen tomorrow. Let the process work its way through, okay?
Okay.
Another thing that we do at Compass, even on asset deals, is we will look at that. What we ask for is the current plan's adoption agreement for the other company. Even though we're not taking on, we want you, as buying that new company, be aware what their benefits are on the 401k plan. Are they doing a 3% match? Are they doing a 4% match? Are they doing a non-elective or a profit sharing contribution? What are they doing so we can be aware of that? Okay, so that's one thing to be aware of. So we always will put that comparison together to make sure that you as the plan sponsor is aware of the benefits and everything else. So
Great.
In a nutshell, that's the asset deal. It's a pretty simple thing. We don't have to really worry about the other plan. The other providers are going to shut it down. It's going to take about 6 months. We want to discuss if there's any loans to roll those loans over, so keep employee relations happy. But besides that, it's pretty simple to do.
Do you find that most folks doing an asset purchase like that will actually, hire on those employees or most of those employees?
From what I've seen, yeah, most do take on the employees. So most take on the employees, and that brings up a good point, Chris, is that those employees, they're gonna have to re-enroll into this plan. You can't use their current deferral rates. They're gonna have to enroll into your plan. And usually we do not want to input their stuff into the record keeper system until after the acquisition's closed, because God forbid, we don't want any flyer or mailing going to those participants before the acquisition actually happened. So we do that, we'll upload that data afterwards. And so they typically can't start participating for 2 to 3 weeks after close, because we have to get them uploaded into the system of the record keeper and everything else. And depending on the time of year, and the record keeper will depend on that. So,
okay.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So yeah.
Now, can you take a few minutes and talk a little bit about the other side of the equation, which is the stock sale or stock purchase? And how is that different?
Yeah, so this is the more complicated one. So, and one thing I want to take another step back and say is at Compass, we have 3 people that focus on merge acquisitions. We have a merge acquisition team, myself, Chase, and Charles. So the 3 of us, so if you're ever in a merge acquisition and you see either Chase or Charles, they're on the merge acquisition team as well too. They're part of our special markets team that handles this. With that being said, the stock purchase, 3 different things can happen on stock purchase. So first is, when you're dealing in the negotiations of the sale, so with stock, you're buying the assets and liabilities of the company. So 2 big things to be aware of. Sometimes attorneys will put in the document, we still want that 401k plan to be terminated the day before acquisition. That's a very key point, because they're saying we don't want to take on that 401k. And the reason why they say we don't want to take on that 401k is, they may have found something in due diligence. Hey, maybe the person hasn't made all their true match. So now you as the new acquirer have to make that up. Or there's maybe late deposits or something going on that's a red flag.
I'm sure there's times where you may not even know what's out there or what happened in the history.
Sometimes you can. Sometimes you kind of stumble upon it. So a lot of times attorneys will say, we want to terminate the plan the day before acquisition. And so more or less what you have to do in that situation is email the current providers, let them know what's going on, and they will draft a amendment to terminate that day. It's not a full termination, but it's the amendment to start the process, okay? So with stock deals, we have that avenue where we don't have to worry about the plan because they're going to terminate the day before close. Great. So we don't worry about that. And then it would kind of follow the same asset kind of workflow process. The second one is we're going to review the plans now and look at protected benefits. What does this plan have versus your plan? And what are some things we just can't change, like vesting? So let's say the other company has a 4-year graded vesting, but you have a 6-year graded. We can't make those employees worse off.
And for those of us who are not as technical, can you just briefly describe what is a protected benefit? Why is that so important?
So protected benefits are basically, it's what it is. It's a benefit that's protected. So the government says, hey, you're going to bring 2 companies together. We can't make these people worse off. Some things are protected, like a vesting schedule, distribution options. Some things that are not protected would be a company match or eligibility. You know what I mean? Those could change. So as we're going through like this grid we put together of here's your plan, here's their plan, here's protected benefits, here's some things we can't change, here are things we could change. We're going to say, what would you like to do, Mr. Client? Do you want to merge the plans together as one or run two separate plans? So this is going to create two separate workflows depending on what's decided on that call. First, let's talk about running two separate plans. I think that's probably the easier. You may say, hey, we don't want to merge it. You know, this company's just a side thing. We don't want them to be part of this other plan. They're different. Fine, that's not a problem. However, we are going to have to make the plan somewhat similar because there's something out there called coverage testing and average benefits testing. And so one thing we have to do is when you run two separate plans, we have to make sure that in general, and I'm going to make this kind of very simple, in general, people are getting equal benefits between the two companies. You know what I mean? So one company's doing a 3% match, one company's doing a 4% match. That'd be okay. What you can't do is one company's getting a 4% match and another company's getting nothing.
Gotcha.
So there's things of this that we will look at and help you with. And sometimes people like to do it. There is additional administrative cost to run two separate plans. But maybe you're avoiding the audit. Maybe, yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of different reasons why you would do it. That is one avenue to go down. The second avenue to go down is merging them together. So you say, hey, we bought this other company and we're going to fold them in. We want to be one company. We want to send the message we're one company. Great, we love that. Well, how are we going to merge the plans together? Depending on the type of plan design. So if it's a safe harbor plan, would really depend. So if it's a safe harbor plan, we don't want to merge that until January 1, okay? Because there's very special rules if we merge it earlier. If we merge it earlier, we have to test the plan and it may fail compliance testing. So we usually want to merge all those plans typically January 1. If it's not safe harbor, we can merge it whenever you want. The key thing to remember, though, is mergers have to happen within one full plan year from the date of acquisition. So let's say I purchase your company today, which is April 3rd or something of that nature.
Close enough.
Close enough, yeah. So we have one full plan year. So we have this year, but then next year is the full plan year. So from January 1 till 12/31, that's the full plan year. So 12/31/2025 is when we'd have to merge them together. If we didn't merge it by that date, then coverage testing and average benefits testing starts applying. And so the government does give us a little leeway on that.
So there is some time, but there's a definite deadline that everything has to be organized by.
Yeah. So what we would do is we'll work with you as the plan sponsor, figure out a great timeline that would work appropriately depending on the type of plan you have, and then bring everything together as one. It does take a lot of heavy lifting to do this. We also will talk to the record keepers because maybe we have to move different record keepers. So there's a lot that goes into this. So whenever you do buy a company, this merging process usually doesn't happen any sooner than 6 months, to be honest. The benefit, though, of doing a stock sale and merging the plans together is employee relations are very smooth. People keep paying their loan back without a problem. Their salary deferrals continue without a problem. So everything kind of continues like for the employees as if nothing would happened, okay? Behind the scenes, we're doing a lot of work. So that's really the process of a stock sale. So with a stock sale, A, are we gonna run two separate plans? We're gonna merge them together. And then B, the other thing is, are you even taking the plan or are they terminating the day before acquisition? So there's a couple of those things we have to be aware of. Obviously, there is cost savings when we merge them together too, because administrative costs, we're only operating one plan versus two plans. So there's a lot of benefit.
Could be cost savings with record keepers if there's significant assets, but again, going back to one of your earlier points, if you are merging two plans together, you're taking on a plan, you then assume liability as the new owners for the history of that plan. So that's something you definitely need to discuss with your attorneys and make sure you do due diligence, before you get into that.
Yeah, and we're always willing to help too with due diligence at a time. So quite often we sign NDAs, and we are involved with this process months before an acquisition actually happens. And we'll dig into it, and we'll say, here are some things that we see red flags in. We'll ask for a bunch of reports, and then we'll dig through it and look at it and say, okay, here are some red flags we see. We may want to ask some more questions to people, or it looks pretty clean. It's a nice, simple plan, and there isn't much. So we're always willing to help in the, I'd say, kind of the due diligence stage if you so need our help for it. And we would sign NDAs, of course, and everything else. But we do a lot of merger acquisitions. We work with a lot of private equity firms. So we're kind of used to this as well on the steps to go through. So.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us into like the workflow and how Compass's process has evolved over time. But the biggest thing is it takes time for these. Even if you're not taking on and merging that prior plan, terminating a plan takes 3 to 6 months. So the testing has to be done, census gathered. So the selling company, selling ownership can't just sell and walk away. They're still going to have to do the final year testing and provide information to make sure those employees get their final contributions, everything's wrapped up, and then the vendors will allow distributions to be paid out of those rollovers to your plan. When we talk about other workflows, again, it really depends on what type it is, but the sooner Compass and your team here is able to know, you're able to have discussions with us, and again, whether we sign an NDA depends on the situation, but we're more than willing to do it. We need time. It takes time for us to do the research, to prepare, and to gather that information and make sure that we go through all those steps to terminate an old plan or to work with the vendors and merge that plan in.
Yep.
Anything to add there, Seth?
No, just keep us in the loop. One thing I always like to say is these go very well when we know more. So the more we know, the better, and we can help with the process as well too. One last thing I just say with the workflows is sometimes people expect us to be able to close down another plan that is with it. I always recommend we'll help and guide through that process. But if that client has another vendor, we'll help with that process. But let's have them close it out. You know what I mean? They'll be able to handle that process and be able to do a lot quicker. But we'll help guide and facilitate that transition. So.
And then work with your team on the communication to the employees. I know there's only so much you can tell them at certain points of time, but once you get to that point where the prior plan is in the termination process, let them know it's going to take 3 to 6 months and distributions will be handled or rollovers will be handled this way. Here are your options and some generic timeframes. And then the loan question is a big one. That's one of the most frequent questions that we get is how are loans going to be handled. So it takes a little research at a time to make sure that can happen and when it's going to happen.
Yeah. So with that, it looks like we do have some questions already coming in, so maybe we can go to switch and answer some questions. So it looks like there's one question I have is how does a partial sale of one division impact the plan of the remaining division that's staying with the original company? That's actually a really great thing. That does happen quite often. Usually if you're buying a division, you're not buying the plan. That would be so the plan will stay with the main company and then these people come over more like an asset sale, think of it that way. And we'd register them for the plan, and then they can roll their money in.
So it'd be rollovers. It wouldn't be a direct transfer.
Rollover. And also with that being said, quite often when that happens, that creates what we call a partial plan termination, which means people become 100% vested in the asset. So if more than 20% of people terminate, then they would become 100% vested in that company asset. So partial plan term is really simple. We'll roll them in. They can register as new employees into this plan. If they have loans, those loans could roll over if the other vendor allowed for it. And typically they should become 100% vested because it would be a partial plan term. So that's a great question.
One of the other items we haven't talked about yet is, and you briefly mentioned it, but we do a side-by-side comparison from a prior plan with your current plan, lay that out on a nice spreadsheet so everyone can see what all the exact benefits, rules, rights, and features are of your plan. And one of the options you may have is if you are acquiring another company or that plan or again, asset sale versus stock sale, you can provide prior service credit for those employees you're bringing over. So that's an option you would have. We do see that to happen in most cases where that service from a prior employer is recognized, but that has to be listed in your plan document to specifically give those employees, and of course we need to know who those employees are to give them the proper credits and years of service that they've already accrued.
Yeah. It looks like we got another great question too. With an asset purchase, what is the responsibility to the prior retirement plan? This is a very great question. So it's an interesting question. Technically, the new owner has no responsibility for that plan. Technically, because it's with the old owner. It's a liability, so it stays on their balance sheet. However, here's where it gets a little tricky, because I see this a lot. Let's say it's a doctor. We work with a lot of doctor's practices. Let's say a doctor's practice gets bought into a aggregator of a doctor practices, okay? So they have to join that plan out because now they're part of this aggregation of doctor practices. That doctor is not going to close down their plan. So it's best sometimes if that the new client sometimes helps with that process to close down and make sure it happens, because I've seen this a bunch where the new, a person sells their firm to another company, they work for that company, but they never close it down. And that new firm is getting all these letters from the IRS and DOL saying, hey, we haven't got your 5500, we don't know what's going on. And so then we're backtracking trying to close it down. So you're not liable for that plan, but I've seen numerous times it not getting shut down.
Well, you get pulled into it, and of course, if you're taking on those employees, they're going to be asking you. You're their new current employer. They're going to be asking you, what's going on? How come I can't get my money?
Yeah.
What's the situation? And just a reminder, when a plan is terminating, and we have other videos on this, not only do you have to complete the final year of testing, but then a final 5500 form needs to be filed. They're going to close that loop with the Department of Labor and the IRS, basically indicating to them that yes, the plan is fully terminated and all assets have been rolled out of the plan. So that final form can't be done until all assets have left the plan through rollovers and distributions. So it's an extra step.
And also too, with a stock sale, you take on that plan, there has to be a final 5500 on that plan too, saying that all the assets transferred into this plan. There's actually a box at the last page of the 5500 stating these two plans merged and everything moved over there. So they actually, the government does a good job tracking where the assets go.
They want the paper trail.
Yeah, they got it.
Let's shift gears to another question. So this question is, if we are merging two plans together, how do we handle automatic enrollment if only one of the plans currently has automatic enrollment? That's something we haven't really talked about specifically.
Yeah. That's a great thing. So within plan documents, we can state when automatic enrollment happens. So this would go through the due diligence process we have, and we would actually look and say, this plan's got automatic enrollment, this plan doesn't. And we would make a decision at that point to say, hey, are we going to automatically enroll these people? So we call it like a re-enroll. Or are we going to only have it for new hires? So depending on how you write the plan would depend on this answer. And this would be something that we would work with you guys on during that process, because automatic enrollment it's a really important topic, and I think it's a good thing for plans. So I typically recommend people, hey, these people are coming into the plan. If they don't auto-enroll by this date, we're auto-enrolling them. So let's say we enroll them into the plan, send out notice, give them 30 days, then we would auto-enroll them 30 days after that, which is typically what we see. But you could write a document so they wouldn't be, but it's not something I'd probably recommend. So.
Would you suggest doing that on the first day of the plan year, January 1, similar to how we would do a safe harbor type plan, if one plan was safe harbor, one was not?
I wouldn't. Obviously, if it's safe harbor, it's different. So if it's a safe harbor plan, we're going to merge that January 1. But let's say it's not a safe harbor plan, I'd say let's merge them together sooner. And what I'd recommend we do is say we're going to merge the plans together, let's say on May 1st. We're going to provide a notice 30 days before May 1st to let people know, hey, if you don't go on to the record keeper website and make a difference, you're going to be on-enrolled at this rate. So that's something to be aware of that we would do.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Next question, is there a time statute of limitation in regards to the responsibility, in quotes, for a plan sponsor who is acquiring a new plan through a stock sale or a stock purchase acquisition? And I think this was, we briefly talked about this earlier, you have until the end of the next full plan year to figure out and make your changes or make that plan merge into your current plan. Of course, you can keep them separate or you can bring them together, but you have to have those decisions and those documents, finalized by the end of the next full plan year.
Yeah. One thing, and with this question too, one thing to be aware of is you're buying this company as a stock sale. You're responsible for all their liabilities. So when you're buying it, you better start looking at even before you merge. You better get a good sense of what their retirement plan is, how it works. Understand. So you as a business owner need to take on that responsibility. And I would say that's day one. You gotta know when you buy a company, whether it's working well, what's not working well, what do we have to replace, what do we have to fix? And that would go into this, I would say that. So your responsibility for that plan is the day you acquire them. You don't have to technically merge or make a decision until a full plan year later. So. Hopefully that helps answer that question. So,
great, thank you. Thank you for your questions. We're almost out of time today, but just as a quick recap, there's lots of details, as you can see, in the different types of merger and acquisitions. Get us involved as early as you possibly can. The more information we know, the better we'll be able to help you. We're more than happy to sign NDAs or get on conference calls with your attorneys, but we want to make sure that you do this right, both for your plan as well as for your employees and any new employees that may be coming over.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us. Our 10th webisode is now coming to a conclusion. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to us directly. But thank you very much and hope to see you on our next webisode.
Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.